This video is brought to you by EAPFoundation.com, the website for all your academic English needs. Written academic English, like any writing, has its own conventions or style. It's a formal written style, which means it has aspects which make it different from spoken academic English, and at the same time being formal, it's quite different from ordinary writing, which you might be more used to, such as writing in letters or emails or stories. So in this video we'll look at 10 style rules for writing in academic English. Rule 1. Use formal vocabulary and avoid less formal or idiomatic vocabulary. Take a look at these examples. They have some words or phrases which would be considered to be fairly informal. In comparison, these sentences contain more formal vocabulary. So the word fathers is more formal than dads. The phrase such as is a better way to give examples in academic English than the word like, which is more informal and common in spoken English. A significant number of is more formal than lots of, and the word three is more formal than the number. In fact, generally in academic writing, you should write the numbers 1, 2, up to 10 in words. Anything more than 10 you can write using numbers. Although the problem with rules is there are always exceptions. So if your number is part of a measurement, you should use a number, however big or small the number is. So for example 3 kg, 6 cm. And if you're mixing numbers below 10 and above 10, then just use figures for all of them. For more information on numbers in academic writing, you can see this page on the EAPFoundation.com website. Rule 2. Use formal verbs instead of multi-word verbs. So there are many verbs in English which use 2 or more words. For example, go up or talk about. Almost always you can use a more formal single word equivalent of these words. So for example, instead of go up, we have increase. Instead of talk about, we have discuss. And there are many other examples of these. Decrease instead of go down. Improve instead of get better. Deteriorate instead of get worse. Raise instead of bring up. Admire instead of look up to. Or enter instead of get into. Rule 3. Use the full form of verbs and avoid contractions. So in place of don't, use the full form, do not. In place of can't, cannot. In place of won't, will not. In place of didn't, did not, and so on. Rule 4. Use formal grammar structures and try to avoid using too many simple sentences. So simple sentences can be okay now and again, but it's best not to have too many of them. So here we have 2 very simple sentences, which could be combined into one more academic sentence. The increasing pollution of the environment is a global concern. This is an example of nominalization, or using noun phrases, which is a common feature of academic writing. Again, here are 2 simple sentences which could be combined. Note-taking, which is an important skill for EAP students, is difficult to master. So in this case, the sentences have been combined using a relative clause, which is an example of complex grammar. Rule 5. Use statements and avoid questions in your writing. So here are 2 examples of questions. What were the reasons behind the decline? How are written and spoken English different? So questions like these are fine if you're giving a presentation, but it's not common to use questions in academic writing. Instead, use statements. There were 4 main reasons for the decline. Written English is different from spoken English. Rule 6. Use impersonal phrases and avoid personal pronouns or adverbs to show feelings. You should try to avoid personal pronouns like I, we, you, and so on, or any adverbs which show your feeling, for example, luckily, remarkably, amazingly. So here are 3 sentences which wouldn't be considered to be very academic because of phrases like I can think of, or I heated the water, or amazingly. It's very common in academic writing to use phrases like there is, or there are, or it is, as in this first example. Avoiding personal pronouns by using passive voice is also very common. The water was heated. And in the case of the adverb amazingly, we can just delete that. Rule 7. Be precise and avoid vague words. In academic writing, you should try to be as precise as possible. So if you have exact figures, you should use exact figures rather than words like about or several. And you should try to use precise words like factor or issue or topic or aspect or reason instead of words like thing. So here are 3 sentences which are not very precise. And here are 3 examples which use more precise language. So instead of several reasons, we can say there are 3 main reasons for this. Instead of about 30 years ago, we can say in the late 1980s. And instead of 3 things, we can say there were 3 factors which led to this result. Rule 8. Remember to cite your sources and avoid making vague claims. So a phrase like this would not be considered to be very academic. Everybody knows that most people are unaware of the problem. This second example with an in-text citation is much more academic. Russell, 2001, states that over 50% of the population are unaware of the problem. Rule 9. Use tentative language and avoid absolute statements. Academic English tends to use more tentative language than everyday writing. This means phrases like possibly, probably, may, might, appears to, seems to, tends to, rather than making absolute statements using words like always or will. So these 2 statements here are very absolute. Education reduces crime. This is caused by the effects of global warming. These can be made more academic by using tentative language. For example, education may reduce crime. It appears that education reduces crime. Or the second one, this is possibly caused by the effects of global warming. This may be caused by the effects of global warming. If you want to know more about tentative language, also called hedging, there's a YouTube video for hedging on the EAP Foundation channel. Finally, Rule 10. Use appropriate transition signals and avoid numbering or bullet points or basic transitions. So it's important in academic writing to make the links between ideas very clear, as well as to clearly introduce new sections of an essay. This should be done using appropriate formal transition signals. It's not common in academic writing to use numbering or bullets except in certain reports, and basic transitions like and or but or so should definitely be avoided. You should also be careful not to use transitions too often, so don't put them at the beginning of every sentence. So here's a couple of examples of transitions which could be improved. And here are some possible improvements. Turning to the question of inflation. In addition, inflation is an important factor. So let's finish up by looking at a text which has a few style problems. The text comes from this page of the EAPFoundation.com website. There are a total of 11 problems. What I'm going to do is read the text and underline the problems as I go along. See if you can spot the problems before I underline them. At the end, I'll look at each one, identify the problem, and suggest ways in which the style can be improved. Many students use poor academic style in their writing, like using I, we, and you. A simple way to improve this is to study good examples of academic style and to follow them. Their writing score will go up as a result, and it will be useful at university. Style is always a problem for Chinese students, who make lots of mistakes when they start to write academic English, by using, for example, phrasal verbs instead of more formal verbs. This is something that such students need to learn to overcome if they wish to reach a higher grade. What other ways are there for students to improve their style? One way is to ask the teacher for advice. A considerable number of students don't listen to their teachers and therefore do not improve. This is a terrible situation. It is important for students to remember that they are now adults, not kids. If they do not follow teachers' advice, their writing style will not improve. So those are the 11 problems. Did you manage to find them all? Let's now look at each one more carefully and think how we can improve it. So the first problem is the word like, which is rather informal. The phrase for example would be better here. And this is rule 1. Use formal vocabulary. So the second problem is go up. This is rule 2. Remember to use single word verbs instead of two-word or multi-word verbs. So a better alternative here is increase. The next problem is and this is rule 10. Use formal transition signals. So in addition is better here. The next problem is always. This is rule 9. Use tentative language instead of making absolute statements. A better word here is often. Style is often a problem for Chinese students. The next problem is lots of. This is rule 1 again. This is slightly informal. A considerable number of is better. The next problem is something. This is rule 7. Use precise words instead of words like thing or something. A better alternative here is a problem. So the next style problem is this question here. Remember to use statements instead of question. This is rule 5. So this statement would be better. There are other ways in which students can improve their style. So here's the next problem. Don't. This is rule 3. Remember to use the full form of verbs. Do not. So here's the next problem. This is rule 6. Avoid personal pronouns and phrases which show your feeling. So here we can just delete this sentence. So here's the next problem. Rule 1 again. Kids is rather informal. The word children is more formal. And here's the final problem. Rule 9 again. Use tentative language instead of absolute statements. So is unlikely to is better here than will not. So that's the end of the video. If you liked it, remember to subscribe or visit the website EAPFoundation.com. Or if you're feeling generous, consider donating on patreon.com so that I can continue to make videos like this one.